Okay guys, before I go to bed, I'm gonna start our book. I'm only gonna read one chapter today, and then hopefully I'll post another chapter every night. It's gonna take about 20 minutes, so find a good spot to sit and a blanket and cuddle up. I'm also gonna post a question to go with it on our Google Classroom. You don't have to do your race or anything, just a good healthy conversation. So when you get done listening to this video, look up at the top and there should be a question above my head. Type in what you think your answer is and feel free to respond to each other, okay? The Secret School. I thought this was a good book for us to do together because I kind of feel like we're being a secret school with your parents helping and maybe in on Google Classroom, super not traditional. So this story takes place during a time when it was one room classroom. So the first chapter kind of just describes the time period, and then it gives you a gut wrench towards the end of the chapter leading into the rest of the story. So if you think today's boring, still listen to tomorrow's and see if it doesn't get more interesting for you. It's not going to be a very long read, just a couple chapters, so I think that we'll finish it before I see you guys on the 6th. Chapter 1. On a cold Monday morning in early April 1925, Ida Bison, age 14, carefully guided her family's battered Model T Ford along a narrow, twisted dirt road in Elk Valley, Colorado. "Brake and clutch!" she shouted. Ida, only 4 feet 11 and unable to reach the floor of the car, knelt on the torn seat and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her 7-year-old brother, Flex, hunkered down on the floor before her and used his hands to push the brake and the clutch pedals down. As Ida adjusted the throttle level, the battered car hiccuped like a damp firecracker and swung into the sharp turn. "Less brake," Ida called. "Where are we at?" Flex called up as he leaned onto the right pedal. "It's where are we?" her older sister corrected. "You're not my teacher, just tell me." "We're close, less brake." The car bumped along, causing the old tin syrup can filled with their lunch to bounce on the seat beside Ida. Behind them, dust twirled out like an unraveling rope, momentarily hiding the high ring of snow-capped mountains that surrounded the valley. As the car churned up the mountain, with enough backfiring to suggest a small war had erupted, Ida caught sight of Tom and his younger sister Mary, riding bareback on their mule, Ruckus. Best friends, Ida and Tom were forever talking about all kinds of things, their plans, their friends, their families, and what was going on in the valley. Seeing him, Ida grinned, reaching over the door, the car had no windows, and squeezed the horn attached to the outside of the car. Honk, honk! At the loud goose-like sound, Ruckus gave a little buck. Though startled, Tom skillfully reined the mule to the side of the road and then turned around and pushed his floppy hair out of his eyes. Seeing Ida's slow-moving car, he smiled and yelled, "Get yourself a mule!" "Join the 20th century," she shouted back. "Who's there?" Flex called from the floor. "Tom and Mary. Now pay attention. We're almost there. Brake easy." The car finally rounded the last bend, bringing Elk Valley Schoolhouse into view. The building stood in the middle of its own small north-south valley, through which the dirt road ran. To the east, low hills gave way to higher ground, woods and mountains. West, it was much the same. Squat and square, the building had a pitched roof and a small bell steeple at the south end. The painted but peeling white clapboard walls had 3 windows on each side. Beyond the school stood 2 privates. That's a bathroom. One for the boys and one for the girls. To the south was a small shallow pond, and in front of the school stood a flagpole not far from the water pump, as well as a lopsided teeter-totter. "Clutch to neutral and brake," Ida shouted as she aimed the car towards their regular parking spot, only to realize another car, one she didn't recognize, was already there. "Hold on," Ida screamed. With all her strength, she turned the wheel hard and then yelled, "Brake!" as she grabbed the hand lever and pulled back. Barely avoiding a crash, the Ford came to a lurching halt next to the other car. Its motor gave one more enormous backfire, sputtered, cuffed twice, and then died with a shuddering sigh. "We're here," Ida announced. Her heart was pounding. "What happened?" Flex asked. "Another car was parked in our spot. I almost hit it." "Whose car?" "I don't know." Ida tightened the brake and then untied the rope that held the side door shut. They had to tie the door shut on the car. With a squeak, it swung open. "Out you go," she called. Flex, crawling head first, slipped down to the ground. "I hate this," he complained as he stretched his arms and his legs. "Beats walking 5 miles both ways," Ida said as she got out and looked towards the school. She brushed the dust from her braided hair and checked to see if her blue ribbons were still tied tightly. Then she smoothed down her dress. Of all the dresses her mother had made for her, this was her favorite. Herbert, Charlie, and Susie, and Natasha were all seated in the school's front porch. As Ida and Flex approached, they all looked up. "Looky here," Herbert shouted gleefully. "I'm back." And he's already tried to tie my shoelaces together," Susie complained. Herbert lifted one of his bare feet and wiggled his toes. "Guess I don't know much about how shoes work," he said. Ida ignored him. "Whose car is that?" she asked. Natasha, who was a year younger than Ida, replied, "Mr. Jordan's." Mr. Jordan was the owner of Wally's mighty fine Elk Valley's feed and grocery store. He was also the head school board. "Guess he can park there if he wants," Ida acknowledged. "How come he's here?" Herbert shrugged. "Dunno." "Miss Fletcher's here?" Philip asked. Yeah, inside," Charlie assured him. Charlie and Susie, who lived just over the hill, were always the first to get to school. What's Mr. Jordan's car doing here?" Tom called as he slid off Ruckus and then helped his sister down. "He come for an inspection?" As always, Tom tied the mule to the rear bumper of the Bison's car with enough rope to allow for grazing. "No one knows," Ida replied. Just then the schoolhouse door opened and Mrs. Fletcher appeared. A slight middle-aged woman with dark hair piled on top of her head. She was dressed in a simple blue cotton dress. "Children," she said, "come in quickly, please. There is grave news to share." Grave means bad or sad. The children exchanged puzzled looks. "What's that supposed to mean?" Herbert mustered as soon as Miss Fletcher went back in. "Shh!" Ida hissed at him. "Don't sass." Flex said she didn't even say her regular good morning. Natasha added, "Wasn't even smiling." "Guess we better get ourselves in and see," Tom said, always the logical one. Without another word, the children climbed up the porch stairs and filed inside. The schoolhouse had but one room, built entirely of wood from the nearby Columbian lumber mill. The building was 20 years old. Most of the room was filled with ancient, low benches and long student desks etched with countless initials. The desks were older than the school building. To the right of the front door was the boys' wardrobe, and on the other side was the girls'. Miss Fletcher's desk stood on the left, close to a small wall-mounted blackboard, which at the moment was perfectly clean. I wonder why they included that in the story. An aspen switch for discipline hung alongside the board. Next to that was the school's library, a small bookcase containing some 15 tethered books, plus a few old magazines. A round iron wood-burning stove stood to the right and opposite the teacher's desk. Kerosene lamps were fastened on each wall, along with pictures of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. A chart of the alphabet. There was also a pulled-down map of Colorado, the United States, and the rest of the world. As Miss Fletcher stood by the door, the 8 students put away their lunch pails and their coats, then took their regular seats at their desks. Flex and Mary, who were the first and second graders, sat up front. Ida and Tom, the only 8th graders, took their place in the back row. Ida, being short, fit easily. Tom, tall and skinny, had to stretch out to get his knees to fit. The other 4 children, 4th through 7th graders, were scattered about on the other benches. Mr. Jordan was standing in a corner, going through Mrs. Fletcher's school account book. He was a red-faced man wearing overalls with a blue shirt. He had left his straw hat on the teacher's desk, something the children would never be allowed to do. Ida, using a trick she had mastered long ago, faced front, but whispered to Tom without moving her lips. "Why do you think he's here?" "I don't know," Tom replied in the same fashion. "My old man said he's a miserly old man." Ida dipped her head to hide her grin. Miss Fletcher stood before her desk, hands clasped, an unconvincing smile on her face. Un means not, so a not convincing smile on her face. "Good morning, children," the teacher began in her soft voice. "I'm so glad that the whole school's in attendance, even you, Herbert." Herbert roused himself from his slouch. "Miss Fletcher, it's my dad. He's always needing me to work. Weren't for him, I'd be sitting here every day being a high-marked scholar." "Well, yes, we shan't discuss that now," Miss Fletcher replied. Composing herself, she looked down, then up at the class. "Children," she began, "I'm sure most of you know this is Mr. Jordan, head of our local school board. Please greet him politely." "Good morning, Mr. Jordan," the children all said. "This morning," Miss Fletcher went on, "I'm afraid I must share painful news with you." The children sat up stiffly. "Last Friday," she continued, "I received a telegram telling me that my mother, back east in Iowa, has become very ill." "Oh, no," Fletcher said loudly. "Naturally," Mr. Jordan cut in, "Miss Fletcher needs to be there, and since there's only a month and a half till term ends, the school board won't be looking for a replacement. As soon as she parts—" "When's that going to be, Miss Fletcher?" "I'll be taking the Wednesday train," she replied. "After which," Mr. Jordan continued, "school will be closed, and it won't commence until the fall term, assuming, of course, we can hire us up a new teacher." Ida and Tom exchanged looks of shock. Mr. Jordan went on, "This means that you can have a long summer vacation, I'm sure. That despite our sorrow news of losing Mrs. Fletcher, that'll cheer you up." Tom raised his hand. "Yes, Tom," Miss Fletcher said. "I'm awful sorry for your trouble, Miss Fletcher, I truly am. But does that mean that Ida and I won't be taking our exit exams?" Miss Fletcher started to speak, but held back. Instead, she looked to Mr. Jordan for the answer. "Exit exams? Well," he said after a moment, "we could hardly get us a new teacher on such short notice. So yes, I guess your exams will have to wait till next year." Ida lifted her hand. "Yes, Ida," said Mrs. Fletcher. "Mr. Jordan," Ida said, "if Tom and I don't pass our exams this term, we can't go to high school in Steamboat Springs come fall." Miss Fletcher turned to Mr. Jordan. "I'm afraid that what Ida is saying is correct," she said, "if they can't move on without those tests." "Now, Ida," Mr. Jordan answered, "as an adult, it is my burden and duty to inform you, as I'm certain your parents do every day, that life teaches us many hard lessons beyond school. No doubt this exam business will be an inconvenience. But I'd suggest that you think a little less of yourself and a little more of Miss Fletcher and her ailing mother. Besides, I'm not so sure a girl needs a high school education. Any more questions?" Oh my gosh, can you believe he said that? For one, is Ida really being selfish by asking that question? No. And for two, of course a girl needs an education just like everybody else. Mr. Jordan asked, looking around the room. Humiliated, Ida shrank down. No one dared say anything else. After shaking hands with Miss Fletcher, Mr. Jordan left. The children gazed at Miss Fletcher. "Miss Fletcher," Ida said on the verge of tears. "Yes, Ida. I'm grieving for you and your mother. But you know how much I wanted to be a teacher. I have to graduate this year. This is my one chance. What am I supposed to do? Miss Fletcher sighed. Ida, she said, I want you to know I begged Mr. Jordan not to close down the school. As for your exams and graduation and Tom's, I can't rightly say what will happen. I will be gone. I'm so sorry. Silence filled the room. In the meanwhile, Miss Fletcher said softly, we had best skip our morning song and get on with today's lesson. Quickly, she gave out assignments. The other children pulled out their books and papers and began to work. Ida, sitting in numb silence, stared before her. All she was aware of was an enormous pain in her chest. Can you imagine working for so long and then it just being taken away? You don't get to graduate. They're not going to even count it. It's pretty sad. That's the end of chapter 2. So take a look at the question up above. Type out some type of a response for me. I loved hearing from you guys today, which for you is yesterday, on what you've been up to this summer. So if you haven't answered that question yet, go in and drop me a little comment or something, okay? And tomorrow we'll read chapter 2. Bye.